friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 11 of my 2024 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be using the Wintry Woodland stamp set by Pretty Pink Posh to create a card. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with my moose, and I decided to pull out the E20s for him. I'm using E21, E23, E25, and E27, starting with my darkest shade, which is that E27, and laying in some shadows down the back of the body, on the back of the legs, being a bit more heavy-handed with the legs that are on the opposite side of the body. Also adding a bit of shadow under the neck, on the chest area, and highlighting the little tufts of hair on his forehead and his tail. And then I'll come in with the next shade, which is going to be the E25. And I could tell right away that my E25 was showing up darker than the E27. And I have noticed that this can happen when your markers are a little bit dry, which mine are. I think when the alcohol inside the barrel starts to dry up, then you're just left with the pigment, and so maybe that's why it looks a little bit darker. But anyway, I just added that right over top of the E27 then, and just used a smaller amount of that. And then I started blending out with the E23. And I am trying to make sure that I'm going over the edge of those previous two shades and pulling them into the mid-tone, because with these darker colors it can really create some harsh lines, and I want to avoid that as much as possible. So I am just really scrubbing over the edge of that E23 with the E21. It's not going to blend perfectly, especially since, like I said, my markers are on the drier side. I need to refill them, but I'm trying to push it off until after the holidays. One thing you can do to kind of get them to blend a little bit better is with the tip to tip, which means you're picking up a little bit of the darker shade with the lighter marker. So I'm using that E21 to pick up some of that E23 and kind of blend over the transition. Another thing you can do is just do a whole second layer, which I also did, and you can see what a difference that made. I did that off screen just to save some time in the video, but you guys have seen me do that lots of times in the past. So I colored in the nose with the lightest two shades, and now I'm switching to E50, E51, and E53 for the antlers. I was looking up pictures of moose, and it seems like there might be different kinds, but most of the pictures that I saw, the antlers were lighter than the body of the moose, so that is what I decided to do. I used the E53 for the shadows, blended out with the E51, and then used the E50 for the highlight. Then I'm going to add the E55 to this combo and do my little bunny. And so I'm using that as my darkest, placing the shadows on the right since the bunny is facing toward the left. That will keep the face nice and light. I'm blending out the E55 with the E53 and then using the E51. I'm also leaving kind of like a white curved area on the bunny's face near the eye, and I'm also going to leave a little white belly. So I blended out with the E50 and let that fade into the white, and now I'm going to take the lightest two shades, the E50 and E51, and use that for the white parts of my fox. Then I'm going to darken up that combo by keeping the E55, adding in the E57 and the E59, and I'm going to do the log. I like to tie in different ranges of a color family across a card when I can, because I feel like it just makes everything a bit more cohesive. So I'm adding that E59 up under the snowdrifts where that would be casting a shadow, and also highlighting the little lines that are drawn there, which give it the grooves, and then blending out with the E57 and then using the E55. And I forgot to do the cut edge of the log while I had those lighter shades out, so just throwing a little E55 on there and then blending out with the E53 and the E51, which I had previously. Then I'm going to work on the branches above, and that is just one image that I stamped a couple of times because I wanted to have some of this foliage coming in from the sides of the card to just create more of a woodland feel. So I'm going to color the branches in with the same shades that I used on the log. It's just a super skinny area to color, so in the narrowest parts I'm using the darkest shade, the E59, and making sure I have all the little bits between the berries, and then I will start blending out with the E57. And these are going to get cut up as well because I only want parts of them. You'll see what I mean later on, but so I wasn't too worried about the blend being absolutely perfect because, like I said, parts of them were going to be snipped off later on anyway. But I did throw in the E55 in the widest areas just because I figured they would maybe get the most light, or you would reflect the most light with the most surface area. Moving on to the fox, I'm going to go with my favorite combo for foxes, which is YR12, YR14, and YR18. I'm using the YR18 for the shadows, adding a little bit of that at the tip of his nose and the back of his tail where that connects to the body, the back of the arms, and then also the bottom of his ears, and then blending that out with the YR14, and then I'll fill in with the YR12. By the way, I do have a video on how to color foxes in multiple different ways, so if you're looking for a different color combo, you might want to check out that video. I also have one for bunnies and several other critters, so you can find that on my Copic favorites playlist. So I am not worried about the feet because I'm going to do something a little bit different with those. I'm bringing out N5 and N7 for the hooves of my moose, and then also I'm going to add a little bit of that to the tips of the ears and the feet of my fox. So the N7 first, and then blending out with the N5. For the fox, I felt like it needed just a little bit more softening, so I did bring in the N3 and just blended that into the orange. And then I'm going to use BG11 to add a little bit of a frosty glow to my snowdrift that is on the log, quick and easy. And then I'm going to bring in R00, R21, and R22 to give my critters some rosy cheeks. I'm going to do a couple of layers on the moose because he's darker, so I want to make sure it stands out. And then I'm blending out with the R21, also adding a little R21 into the fox's ears. And then for the fox and the bunny, I'll also blend out with the R00. For the moose, I just went back in with the R22 and blended out with the R21. Then I'm going to switch to some reds. It's still in the R20 family, but I'm going to switch to R24, R29, and R39 for all of these berries. I love to use red around the holidays whenever possible because it's just such a festive color. Sometimes I like to go non-traditional and do something a little bit different, like pinks or purples or whatever, but since this is kind of like in the woods, I thought I would just go with the traditional red. So I used a little E39 at the center of the berries, kind of like where they're touching. That would be where the light would have the hardest time reaching, so that would be the most shadowed. And then blending out with the R29, and then I'm going to finish with the R24, which is a really warm kind of coral red, which I think also ties in nicely with the warm orange tones of the fox. I actually tried to go with all really warm and rich tones for the Copic coloring today because I just really enjoy the juxtaposition between the warm Copic coloring and then the cold scene that I'm going to be creating in the background. I just think it's, I don't know, it just makes everything look kind of extra cozy when the coloring is warm, and the background is kind of cool colors. So I am now switching to some greens. I'm going to use G20, G21, G24, and G28, although actually I ended up not using the G21. Sometimes I need to throw a little bit of the G21 in there because the leap from the G20 and the G24 is pretty wide. And if the image is a little bit larger, the G20 will really push back that G24 if I skip over the G21. But I decided to try skipping over it on the first couple just to see how it worked. And I actually liked the way it looked, because sometimes when you see these holly leaves, they are kind of like white or pale yellow at the tips. It's kind of like creamy shades. And so I kind of liked the way that looked when it reacted with the G20 reacted with the G24. So I ended up just not using the G21, but I had it out just in case I needed it. So like I said, I started with the G28 in the center of the leaf and kind of outlined the line that is there, and then blended out with the G24, and now I'm using that G20 and just making sure to really work over the edge of that G24 so that it kind of fades nicely. Like I said, if it was a larger image, it really wouldn't work. It would push it back too much and you would really see that transition. But I think for these little holly leaves and the way that I was picturing them in my head, it actually worked. So yeah, I am going to finish up these leaves, just a couple more, and that is going to complete the coloring. So I will grab a black Sakura jelly roll marker. I just got a new one, so it's really nice and juicy. I'm going to go over the eyes of my critters. Just really makes them bright and shiny, kind of brings them to life. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. And I wanted to try to do this in a different way today. I wanted to create a streaky, almost Aurora Borealis type background. And I have never tried anything like this before. I just saw a picture somewhere online of a sky that looked like this, and I wanted to try to create it. So I am just kind of pulling the colors down so that it creates some lines. And then I'm going to bring in my next shade, which is going to be Cracked Pistachio. And I'm going to kind of overlap it and go between it and just continue creating that kind of streaky look. And once I have the Cracked Pistachio laid in, I'm going to darken it up even further with a little bit of Evergreen Bough. I wanted the greens in there to kind of tie into the green of the holly leaves that I colored. I wanted it to be kind of like a mix of blue and green. So I'm going to bring in a little bit more blue now. I'm going to use Broken China. And I started off with really soft colors because I wasn't sure how the technique was going to go. And I kind of wanted a little bit of a softer sky. So yeah, so far I really like how it's turning out. I will say it ended up getting a little bit muddied, and I think maybe I shouldn't have gone back and forth quite as much as I did. I am so used to going back and forth to get the colors to blend, but I actually preferred a little bit more of a streaky look for this technique. I really like how the middle part is turning out. I just feel like the top part is maybe getting a bit muddied. But I brought in Uncharted Mariner next. I wanted to have some darker patches so that there would be some difference between the dark and the light. And that is where the top part started to get a little bit too muddied, but it's still not too bad. I decided to flip the panel upside down and maybe try to pull some streaks in from the opposite direction as well. The bottom is going to be covered up by some snowdrifts, but just to kind of reinforce some of the greens in there especially, I added that just coming in from the other direction. And then I also added in a little bit of the blue with the Uncharted Mariner once again. And then I am going to flip the panel back around and come in with my last shade, which is going to be Chipped Sapphire. I wanted to have a little bit of a darker sky at the top and then kind of fade into a lighter sky. I do think that next time I try this technique, because I definitely will try it again, I do like how it turned out, but I think I could definitely tweak it a little bit and make it better. But next time I think I would cut my panel a little bit oversized so that I have room to trim down some of the top where the colors kind of got blended, just because that's where I was starting with the tool. And so like it created those like circled areas, you know, the streaks came through in the middle, but at the top you got the circle of the tool. And in order to blend that, I had to add extra ink. And so if I had made my panel a little bit oversized, I would have had more room to trim that down to use the part of the panel that I really liked the best. But anyway, I am going to distress this now and make it look like a starry night sky. So I'm spritzing a little bit of water onto an acrylic block and then picking it up with a thin paintbrush and tapping it off the side, letting that water react with the Distress Oxide inks, and then I will blot it up with a dry tissue. I usually use a paper towel, but my paper towel roll was empty and I didn't want to stop filming to go get a new one. So I just used a tissue that was on my desk. And then I added a little bit more and letting that react and seeing how I like it, and then just continuing to distress that, especially at the top. I just wanted to lighten it up with a little bit of extra splatter detail. And then I also wanted to add some brighter white stars in the sky. So I'm going to pick up some of my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's just white acrylic paint in a jar. Mix that in with the leftover water on my block and then tap that all over the background as well. And I think that also really brought the Aurora Borealis to life and lightened up some of the darker area of the sky. So I'm going to set this panel aside to dry, and in the meantime I am going to cut 2 white snowdrifts using the Lawn Fawn Stitch Hillside borders and just some plain white cardstock. And I'm going to stamp a greeting from the Pretty Pink Posh Holiday Greetings on the larger of the 2. And I'm using some Lawn Fawn Fish Tank ink. I thought that went really well with the Uncharted Mariner. So I am going to stamp that down a couple of times to make sure my impression is nice and bold and clear. And then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using MFT's Snow Cone cardstock. And the sentiment and the snowflakes are from the Holiday Greetings stamp set. And then the bird is from the Wintry Woodland. So now I'm ready to start assembling. I did trim that panel down just slightly using the Lawn Fawn Outside In Stitch Rectangle Stackables, which just trims off about 1/8 of an inch, but it gives you a little bit of a border of that cardstock to show through. Just a nice finished look. And then I am going to line up my bottom snowdrift so that I can position my top snowdrift. The top one is going to get glued flat to the card, and then the bottom one is going to get popped up on foam tape. So as you can see, most of the part that I really liked on that panel did get covered up by my snowdrifts, but they needed to be that high because I had several critters to squeeze into the scene. So yeah, like I said, if I were to do it again, I would definitely start with a larger panel for that background. I'm going to take some BG11 and add that to the top of the snowdrifts so that they match the snow that is on top of the log. And I also took the BG000 and just softened the edge of that so it wasn't quite so harsh. And then I am going to bring in my images. And I'm first going to lay out my critters to kind of get a feel for how I want that to come together. So I'm going to tuck that bunny on the log back behind the first snowdrift, and then add my fox down at the bottom near the sentiment, and the moose will go up on the top snowdrift, so he's kind of coming into the scene. And I am gluing all of those flat to the card, but the fox is on the snowdrift that is popped up, so he's a little bit raised from the other two. The moose and the bunny I adhered with my Barely Art Precision craft glue, which I absolutely love. And then before I go any farther, I wanted to add some little footprints into the scene next to the moose and the fox. I didn't worry about it for the bunny since there's not much left over there and his footprints would mostly be hidden by the log anyway. And then I also added in a little bit of that BG000 to kind of elongate them and make them look a little bit more deep in the snow. Then I'll take the branches and start to arrange those and kind of figure out how I want those to look on the card. I wanted this smaller one to come in from the right side near the bunny and the log, but I also don't want to cover up any part of my sentiment, so it was just kind of figuring out how that would all fit together. This first one I decided to add behind the moose's antlers, coming in from the top left side. So I am arranging that, and I am going to let that glue dry for a little bit before I trim off the excess. And then the next one I wanted to pop up with some foam tape to add some dimension, so that is on the same level as the bottom snowdrift. I'll use my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors to trim those down so it lines up with the edge of the focal panel. And I also trimmed this other piece down quite a bit so that it would just kind of come in from that side, right overlapping the edge of the log. And then I had an extra piece that I thought might look nice over on the left hand side so that we would have two coming in from above and two coming in from the ground. And so I just trimmed that down as well, and I'm going to glue that back behind the fox. But I needed just a tiny little piece of foam tape because part of that leaf was going to go above the snowdrift, which is popped up. So I'm just going to add that, and I really like how that turned out. I think it looks really like it's a woodland scene now with all of the branches. I'm going to add a little bit of Stardust Stickles to give this scene a bit of sparkle. I'm going to dot that onto all of my red berries so they are super festive and have like a nice icy finish to them. I had a little bit too much on that one. I didn't want it to cover up the black outlines of the berries, so I just wiped a bit off with my finger. And then I am going to also add a little bit to the edge of the snow, so the top edge of the log, and then also the two snowdrifts. So they are sparkly, and then of course I had to put it in the footsteps since they are also in the snow. And that is going to finish up this card, so I will lift it up so you can see all of the detail, catch some of the sparkle and shine, and of course give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will all be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I will also put on screen day 11 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series in case you'd like to continue watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.